Hello folks, this is Tony with Audio Basics. Today we're going to talk about DI boxes, or direct boxes. There are a couple shapes and sizes these come in, and we're going to go over when to use them, which ones to use, and what purpose they serve on your stage or in your studio. So, what does a direct box do? From a technical standpoint, it converts your unbalanced instrument signal into a balanced signal that can travel longer distances with less noise and less interference. I'm sure you've noticed that your instrument cables you use for bass, guitar, or keyboard have two conductors. A direct box converts this simple transmission into a more refined 3-conductor balanced signal that can travel almost any practical distance without a loss of quality or introduction of noise. This conversion can also allow for the elimination of ground noise due to the fact that your equipment may not be on the same electrical circuit as whatever you're plugging into. After about 20 to 30 feet, an instrument cable is more receptive to noise and signal degradation. Furthermore, some equipment you may want to use with your instrument may only physically have balanced or XLR inputs. This brings us to purpose. You might need a DI box on stage to get your clean bass guitar signal to both your amplifier on stage and the house PA. You may also want a DI box at home or in the studio when you want to record your electric guitar directly to your interface and affect it later in the box. Lastly, many keyboardists depend on DI boxes to send signal directly to the PA system at whatever venue they're performing at. In all of these scenarios, converting your signal to a balanced one will allow the highest quality audio to be captured by the recipient. Hooray for quality! Okay, so aside from the benefits of a generally more dependable and higher fidelity way to send your signal, there can also be some tonal benefits for using a DI box. The best example of this would probably be bass guitar. Let's look at some examples. I've got my buddy Steve here, professional bassist and generally alright guy. We've got his bass hooked up to this amplifier with a mic on it, as well as a passive direct box going through a nice preamp. Let's listen to the difference in sound here between the two signals. As you may be able to hear, the direct input has a much fatter low end, and the definition seems cleaner too. However, this may not be the exact bass sound you're going for. That's why I've got both tracks here, and we can mix in the direct signal with the amp sound to round out and reinforce the tone. This basic technique is used both on stage and in the studio quite regularly. Cool! Now that we've seen a typical usage scenario for the passive direct box, let's take a look at another variation, the active DI. These are traditionally used on sources that have lower or quieter output in order to help boost the signal to a more usable level by modern equipment. The active DI tends to sound wetter than a typical passive variant, but at the cost of convenience. These units need external power. Some may have their own power supply, while others can be activated via battery or through phantom power provided by your PA system or mixer. Let's listen to the same bass riff from Steve, but through an active DI, and then we'll compare it to the passive one. Can you hear the difference? The active DI adds some presence and top end, leaving the passive one sounding quite dull in comparison. However, the more present sound may not be what is always appropriate for your application. The decision to use either an active or passive DI nowadays can be quite subjective, but from a general use standpoint, I would make your choice as follows. Passive bass pickups, I would start with an active DI, and for basses with active pickup systems, the opposite. Use a passive DI to start. Most modern keyboards, synthesizers, and samplers sound great with a passive DI. However, vintage keys such as Fender Rhodes would greatly benefit from an active DI, as their output is generally much lower and quite dark. Acoustic guitars are generally similar to basses in how I might choose an appropriate direct box. Active pickups will use a passive DI, and a passive pickup might want an active DI. However, due to the fact that the acoustic guitar has such a wide range of sounds sonically and a great varying array of playstyles, your choice may differ, and that's okay. Many acoustic instruments, such as violin, cello, and upright bass, may use a piezo-style pickup that works off of vibrations. These types of pickups traditionally have very low output and as such almost require the use of an active DI. Okay, now that we've covered basic uses for DIs, let's talk about the signal levels coming off of your sound sources so we can make sure that we can amplify them correctly. Your typical modern keyboard with quarter-inch outputs puts out a signal level called line level. This is a very strong signal and tends to be the standard transmission level of audio between most products such as mixers, processors, amplifiers, and even recording interfaces. There are actually two ratings for line level, and they are +4 dBu and -10 dBV. Many products have a physical or software switch to change between these two, but you can always refer to your owner's manual to see what the actual output or input level is for your particular product. I mention this because it is the goal of every sound engineer, recording or live, to amplify audio signals on stage or in a studio up to a usable line level where most processing can occur most efficiently. So, when plugging your sound source into a DI box, please keep this in mind. Some preamps and interfaces may have separate inputs for mic or line level sources. The inputs designated as line level do not have preamp circuits in them. So, hooking up your acoustic guitar DI to a line level input is not going to give you a good usable sound, for example. Conversely, hooking up your keyboard through a DI and into the mic input on your mixer or recording interface will result in your signal being quite loud and distorted. Some products combat this with something called a pad. A pad attenuates an input by a set amount to allow more headroom for the incoming audio signal. Quite useful when you only have mic inputs on your mixer. On the other end of the signal level spectrum, you have your instruments, such as electric guitar and bass. These transmit a signal called instrument level, believe it or not. This signal strength falls between mic level and line level in terms of voltage, but for our intentions today, hooking up an instrument level source to a mic preamp through a DI box is quite alright. In fact, it's commonplace in most scenarios. This will allow you to get that instrument level signal up to a workable line level in order to properly record it or amplify it to a PA system. Let's move on to some items that can help you expand your flexibility on stage and in the studio using your new knowledge pertaining to signal levels and conversion between balanced and unbalanced transmissions. Here we have a Reamp box. This unit allows you to take a line level source and convert it to an unbalanced instrument level output to send to your guitar or bass amplifier. You could record your guitar or bass signal with a direct box and then send it out of your DAW and into an amp for you to endlessly tweak the sound, or try it on different amps. Even test it out with different effects pedals. You can really get creative here with different tones or recording methods. Here are some examples. Next, let's take a look at the ABY Switcher. This is a flexible piece of equipment that allows you to combine two sources, hence the AB part of the name, or split a single source out to two separate inputs, hence the Y. You want to make sure that your ABY switch is transformer isolated to avoid any loss of signal quality due to impedance mismatches while you're plugged into multiple sound sources or destinations. Impedance is the measurement of resistance across an electrical circuit. The unit of measure used to represent this value is measured in ohms. Different instruments and amplifiers will have higher or lower ohm ratings depending on their particular electric circuit. Due to these differences, having two instruments plugged into the same amplifier will change how each of them react to the input, usually resulting in a loss of signal for both instruments. Using an ABY box with transformer isolation will separate these signals electrically, allowing both to have a direct connection to the amplifier without the added resistance of the other. Freaking technology, man. This works similarly in principle with the Y functionality of an ABY box. A bass guitar plugged into two different amps without a transformer isolated output will be affected by the resistance of the two inputs it's plugged into. The result will be less signal going to each amplifier. Again, a transformer isolated output allows your signal going to each source to be electrically separated, so you have a nice strong signal going to both inputs. One more item I'd like to mention is the Radial SGI. There are a couple other options similar to this system, but since I was already on the Radial website, this is the one we're using for my example. This system allows you to take your instrument level signal and transmit it between the two boxes over 100 meters. When your signal comes out the other end, it is mostly unchanged, including signal level and impedance. This allows you to perform in one spot with your instrument while having the amplifier in another location, without the loss of signal associated with long, unbalanced cable runs. Recording an instrument while the amp is in another room or having an amp close mic'd off stage are two obvious uses for this system. Of course, there are other systems like this available. I just chose this one for my example out of laziness. So let's recap for today. We learned that a direct box converts an unbalanced signal into a balanced one. We looked at a few examples of where you would want to use a DI, both on stage and in the studio. We even compared some of the differences between active and passive DIs. Lastly, we also established that using a DI does not necessarily change your signal level, and as such, there is a difference between line level and instrument level sources. As we now know, this will inform what inputs we will be plugging our sound sources into. We also went over a few other items that may be useful in this world of converting between balanced and unbalanced. Please let me know in the comments below if there is anything here you might still have a question about. Feel free to hit me on Instagram as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Also, follow me there for updates about where I am and what I'm up to, as well as gigs I've done in the past. I appreciate you taking the time to watch today, and I hope that this has helped you learn some more audio basics. Thanks, and sound good.